we had constructed an economy that was not resilient. We put saving a few pennies up front at the expense of our ability to manage risk, just like in the days before the 2008 crisis. I've described it as constructing cars without spare tires. You save a little bit of money not having a spare tire. You save a little weight, get a little bit better gas mileage. But it was foolish. When you have a flat tire and you're hundreds of miles away from the nearest gas station, you regret not having that spare tire. So it was short-termism, an aspect of capitalism, American style, and unfortunately a style in many other countries, that drove this lack of resilience of our markets. We've been denigrating the role of government for 40 years, since Reagan and Thatcher. We were left unprepared. And 40 years was bad enough, but then came along Trump, and he disbanded this White House office for responding to pandemics. So we were not capable of responding in the way we should. We were not resilient. Of course, we understand why markets will underinvest in creating stockpiles of medical equipment that is needed. And that's why the government had created a national stockpile of masks and protective gear, and ventilators. But again, under neoliberalism and under Trump, there was not a recognition of these risks, a kind of short-sightedness that was unbelievable. And the result was they allowed this national stockpile to be depleted. And so when the pandemic struck, we were not prepared. The pandemic has also exposed a number of weaknesses in our societies. You know, this nasty virus is not an equal opportunity virus. I've said that many a time. It goes after those with weak conditions. And in countries with poor healthcare systems and high levels of economic inequality, there are many individuals with poor health conditions. And among the advanced countries, the United States, in spite of its income, has among the poorest levels of health, reflected, for instance, in life expectancy. Even worse, life expectancy since Trump became the president has not done well. It has stayed lower than it was before he became the president. And even more, there's a problem of disparities. Health disparities in the United States are larger than in other advanced countries. So this nasty virus has a fertile field in countries like the United States, where there is not good systems of health. The disease, the pandemic, has not only exposed the inequalities in our society, it has exacerbated them. The people at the bottom have not only been exposed to confronted higher death rates, higher incidence of the disease, they have suffered economically far more. They are the people who've lost their jobs. The people at the other end, at the top, have by and large kept their jobs and have done relatively well. That's why people in the United States are talking about a K-shaped recovery. Those at the bottom not doing very well, those at the top going on very much as normal. And we see that in many aspects of the responses to the crisis. Those at the bottom have been living paycheck to paycheck, as I said before. When they get a check from the government, they spend it. And if they don't get a check for government, they go hungry. And record numbers of Americans are going to bed hungry at night, not because they're on a diet, but because they can't afford food. This in one of the richest countries in the world. At the other end, the rich are engaged in high levels of savings. The average savings rate in the United States has been at the rates of 15, 20, 25%, when normally it's at the rate of 2, 3, 4, 5%. They're building up precautionary balances, prepared for a rainy day, have more money than they know than they need. So we have a bifurcated society. There has to be also a new globalization. We realize that global supply chains are not resilient. That means we will have to create more diversified, more resilient supply chains. We've seen some unparalleled global cooperation among the scientists who've worked together throughout the entire world to create therapeutics, vaccines, tests to help us deal with the pandemic. They've worked tirelessly, shunted aside concerns about who gets first to publish. That are normally high in academics' mind, but they focused on the issue of a quick response to this global pandemic. But that kind of global solidarity has unfortunately not been shown by some countries and by some corporations. We've seen on the part of the United States a kind of vaccine nativism that is extraordinarily ugly. We won't have a global recovery from the pandemic unless all countries are protected. And we need to make sure that the vaccine and the therapeutics are allocated to reflect the priorities for dealing with the pandemic globally. So this is a moment which should be a moment of global cooperation and a moment where we work to strengthen global cooperation through multilateral institutions. Some of the multilateral institutions have played a very important role. The World Health Organization has not been perfect, but no institution, human institution, is ever perfect. But what we should be working to do is to strengthen these institutions. In the economic realm, the IMF has really been exemplary. It has worked tirelessly to make sure that funds are being made available to the developing countries and emerging markets that need the funds to fight the pandemic. And they've been working hard to make sure that the resources are made available to these countries to have a robust recovery. Just like we won't have, the world won't be free from the pandemic until it's free everywhere, the world won't have a robust recovery until there's a robust recovery everywhere. In the aftermath of the 2008 crisis, the President of the General Assembly asked me to chair an international commission to address the question, what can we do to make a more stable global financial architecture? And one of our recommendations was the creation of a framework for a restructuring of sovereign debt. In response to our commission's report, the General Assembly adopted a resolution to support the creation of that framework in 2014. And in 2015, they adopted a set of principles to guide that restructuring, overwhelmingly with just a few countries opposing. Unfortunately, among the countries opposing was the United States. And so now that we are at the moment of need where we need a debt restructuring framework more than we've ever needed it before, we don't have it. And the likelihood is going to be that there's going to be unnecessary suffering of a huge magnitude and a slow global recovery. What kind of recovery should we have? Well, what is very clear is we don't want to just bounce back to where we were in January 2020. As I said before, the crisis, the pandemic, has exposed the weaknesses in our society, the weaknesses in our economy, an economy, a politics that is lacks resilience, lacks balance, marked by high levels of inequality. And while we've been fighting the pandemic, climate change has continued to go on apace. Here in the United States, we've seen the consequences in a devastating way. Fires burning California, Oregon, Washington, floods in Iowa, hurricanes, exerting devastation in the billions and tens of billions of dollars. So we want to build back better. And building back better means building back greener, more sustainable in every way. Building back more equal, building back more knowledge-based. In Europe, you talk about a digital, building back more digital.